Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the final week of PSF 401 Political Behavior. So, today let's return to our discussion of vote choice, still attempting to answer the question of how do people decide who to vote for, but this time within local elections. So, here we're talking about elections for mayor, for county commissioner, for school board, for local dog catcher, whatever it might be. Now, first off, we need to consider local elections as fundamentally different from state or local elections. As Traunstein demonstrated, voters believe and behave fundamentally differently at the local level than they do at the national level. And the primary reason for this is a difference in what voters are evaluating. Thinking about presidential elections, voters may decide which candidate to vote for based on partisan identity or candidate image or on policy preferences or on foreign policy or even just on the economy with or without a retrospective view. Now, beyond partisanship and candidate image, which we'll return to in a moment, these are the criteria because it is assumed that the president has the ability to implement those promises, and ignoring any issues here with the credibility of campaign promises for a moment, the president is assumed to have the ability to influence those topics. Now, moreover, if most people are ill informed about politics at the national level, which has the most media attention, individual politicians, policies, and the like, then likely even less well informed about state or local politics. People are likely know even less about state and local politics as compared to national politics here. Let's think about for a moment about state politics, specifically state legislators or governors here. These politicians only have the ability to act on state level issues. Think budgets, health and safety, and so on here. It doesn't make sense for a gubernatorial candidate to campaign on foreign policy issues, nor does it make sense for a voter in a state level election to have their vote choice influenced by that evaluation, as all of the candidates in that election have a 0% chance of influencing or implementing those promises. Now, the criteria for evaluating candidates is thus fundamentally different between federal and state elections. In the same way, local elections are fundamentally different from both federal and state elections. Now, the explanations that we have for national level politics are largely inapplicable for these reasons. And Oliver Ha and Callan do a really good job walking through why each of these explanations that we covered in the course don't really apply to local elections. The key issues in local elections tend to be highly parochial or highly small scale in nature, as the mayor or school board member or sheriff is extremely limited in the scope of things within their power to actually influence, or otherwise the topics that they're actually able to address. One exception here, as we've seen in recent years, is the nationalization of politics, where what happens in Washington has an effect on elections at all other levels. And this is definitely true. Think about school board elections where LGBTQ plus issues are central, or vaccine mandates, or any other big social issues from the last decade. The difference here is that while a school board member has no meaningful impact on the national debt, they can have an impact or at least influence the implementation of policies derived from these national level culture war type conflicts or culture war type issues here. So that's the first big difference, right? A separation as to what types of issues are meaningful in these elections. And again, think about the effect that this has on the proposed influence of ideology. What leverage does someone's fiscal conservatism have on whether or not phones should be allowed within a high school? Or another person's social liberalism have on which candidate is best suited to, I don't know, overseeing the county's pension office or pension fund, for example, here. Thankfully, at the local level, most of the issues are comparatively simple, at least in comparison to national level politics. You don't need a robust ideological worldview to think that students shouldn't have cell phones in class, or that someone with demonstrated financial responsibility or demonstrated moral character is better suited to handling the pension funds of city employees, for example. Now, the second big issue in these elections is that they are low information, and around the country, about 75% of these are nonpartisan. So think about the importance that partisanship has played in terms of vote choice throughout this course, but particularly in the past few weeks here. Campbell, Converse, Miller, and Stokes emphasize partisanship, and it is indeed one of, if not the most influential factors on vote choice at both the national and state level. But when we look at elections at the local level, at least in roughly 75% of these, voters have to incur much more of a cost in order to cast an informed vote in these elections. And the most important heuristic that people use in elections generally is usually not even available. Now, moreover, here, most people at the local level don't even know that local elections are occurring. Most people at the local level are completely oblivious to the fact that local elections are taking place, or when they are, or how they actually go vote. Now, this does vary based on the size and the influence of the municipality. For example, the mayoral race for New York City that attracted national level attention. The school board race here in Fairbanks, not so much, right? There's differences here for sure. Now, all of this raises somewhat of an issue, and this is described by Oliver Ha and Callan. But if most Americans are so uninformed about high profile national issues, then why would they be more knowledgeable about issues in regard to their municipalities, particularly in those places without any local media coverage? And the answer here comes from turnout rates. Turnout rates in local elections, especially where these take place on a different day than other races or in off years from the national cycle, are incredibly low. Turnout rates of like 30, 20, even 10% turnout in some cases here. On the ballot in November is potentially an initiative to change when these local elections occur in Alaska. It's one of the key issues here. And you might argue that this low level of turnout is an issue, that it is undemocratic, opens the door for corruption and a lack of accountability. And perhaps you're right. But looking at local voters, that 30, 20, 10% of voters who actually vote in local elections, they are highly motivated, highly knowledgeable about the specific issues within their locality, and generally have specific stakes in the outcomes. Moreover, local voters are much more influential. One ballot amongst 1,000 possesses far more leverage than 1 in 1 million or 1 in 100 million. Local votes really matter. Let's think about this in terms of a hypothetical for a moment. Suppose you have children in elementary school and you're dissatisfied with the public school curriculum. You don't think that the local public school is doing a good job. Well, one of the steps you might take is to look into the local school board members. What are they trying to do? You might join with other dissatisfied parents to come together and demand changes. And this type of local level process also applies to local business owners or people who rely on public transportation, whatever it might be. As described by Oliver Ha and Callan, the typical local voter is someone who is politically active and fairly knowledgeable about local politics, connected to local political networks, and concerned about some particular issues. Well, this really doesn't meld with our kind of popular conception about democratic accountability and popular sovereignty and all the rest of this. It actually results in a highly responsive system whereby a lack of good governance, or at least not following the public's view at the or desires at the local level, is going to be met with a democratic response in a really meaningful way. Now, it's not all good. Necessarily, this will result in the interest of those active in local politics having their interests represented to a greater extent. But at least in this context, the barrier to entry is much lower than state and national politics here. So now we finally return to our discussion of candidate image and partisanship here. Voters in national elections rely on the heuristic of partisanship or on the straightforward decision of which candidate is more likable or which candidate do they find more charismatic, for example. The main reason for this is a lack of political information. As Oliver Ha and Callan describe, Partisanship and candidate charisma are so important in national elections because the average voter knows so little about national politics. This isn't true at the local level because those who know so little about local politics don't vote in local elections. They are the ones who are oblivious to that local elections are even going on. So, because there is such low turnout, the people who are actually voting in those elections don't need to rely on partisanship. They don't need to rely on candidate image or likability or any other heuristics. At least according to the authors here, voters in local elections tend to vote on the basis of their own interests or on policy considerations or some other meaningful factor to them. Now, there are two big exceptions to this. We can consider these as if an individual was looking for the local post office and just so happened to stumble into the ballot box. How are they going to cast a ballot? How are they going to make a decision? First and foremost here is familiarity or name recognition. If there is a name that they recognize, they're going to vote for that candidate, so long as there isn't a negative association or that name wasn't in the news for negative reasons and that they can recall those negative reasons. This is a very well established phenomenon in political science. Alternatively, and a bit more problematically here, people will vote for names that are socially or culturally familiar. There are a lot of implicit assumptions we make solely based on a name. Looking at two candidates, we would likely assume explicitly, consciously or subconsciously, explicitly or implicitly, that George Smith is probably white, while Jorge Herrero is likely Hispanic. Jorge and Herrero in this context are Spanish for George and Smith, respectively. It's the same name, just with different cultural and social assumptions attached to it. With absolutely no other information, many people will vote for the name that they assume they share a social or ethnic or racial or other group identity with. We think that this behavior is because of an assumption of greater shared preferences or priorities or just greater familiarity in general, but it's really just difficult to identify why or study why this occurs, largely due to things like observer bias and social desirability biases and the like here. It's something that we observe, but we don't really understand the causal mechanism behind it here. A final point I want to make here today, and a factor that political science has only recently begun examining, is the effect of place-based identity. Now, this is something that, if you grew up in Alaska, this may seem obvious to you. But fundamentally, people want to vote for candidates that are of that locality in local elections, or of that state in state elections. The next time that you receive the Elections Essentials pamphlet that goes out before elections here, look through the candidate descriptions. You'll see just how many candidates emphasize place, emphasize their being of Alaska or their Alaska-ness as a reason that you should vote for them. Now, how this is employed varies, right? You can be of a place, therefore you know the issues more, or you better represent Alaska values, whatever it might be. Now, what's interesting about this is that the being of a place, the appeal of that is not actually universal. It actually requires a strong local, regional, or state identity in order to be influential to the voter. In an urban area where a large percentage of the voters are transplants, think somewhere like Atlanta, this type of appeal is not going to be tremendously persuasive. Even in small areas without a high level of migration, if that place doesn't have a strong identity, a candidate proclaiming that they're of Springfield, Idaho, that's going to be met with a profound "so what?" That being of a place, that identity, has to carry meaning, has to have implications and information beyond that label in order to be influential. This is something to think about where national level candidates proclaim that they are American or they're proud Americans or whatever it might be. What information specifically are they trying to transmit with that? So that's all I have for you today. And indeed, this is the final video lecture for the course. Your final reading analysis is due this Sunday, with the peer reviews for that analysis due the following Friday. The final exam period will open next Monday at midnight, and you'll have until the following Sunday in order to complete the exam or complete the final. This will follow the same format and procedures as the midterm, so be sure to review the exam procedures video that's posted on Canvas prior to beginning the final. The final itself will gauge your understanding of concepts covered across the course. Most questions will ask you to connect concepts from before and after the midterm, so be sure to brush up on your notes. I will make announcements on Canvas until the end of the semester, so be sure to check back in. So that's all I have for you in the course. I hope you found it interesting and have taken some lessons that you can apply to your own lives. Feel free to stop by my office if you're ever around Fairbanks, ever around campus, or feel free to send me an email moving forward. Otherwise, push through strong to the end of the semester and otherwise enjoy your summer.